We're going to go ahead and start. Good
Here twice in 1 year. We can cover that. I don't need to see everything that Grants has to offer.
Good afternoon. Today is June 21st, 2022, and the time is 4:30 p.m. To ensure that we have a quorum present, I'm going to read out the names of the members of the executive committee, and if you're here, please say present. Richard Traypark, present. Colin Clark. Present. Don Davidson.
Here in minutes.
Yep. Cameron Johnson. Ed Tariak. Andrew McEwing. Val Melville.
Present.
John McPherson.
Present.
James Stanton. Michael Stack.
Present.
John Becker. Okay. Thank you. I note here that we have or will have a quorum of the executive committee present. I'll call this executive committee meeting of the board of directors of Uplift Education. Our first item of business is a community forum. Alex, do we have anybody signed up today?
We do not.
Thank you. The second item is taking up the approval of the board minutes from May 24th, 2022, which were provided in your pre-read. Are there any questions on the recommended minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the board minutes from May 24th as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. If there's any votes against the motion, hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Yasmin for our mission moment.
Great. So I want to thank the board members who came up with this idea that we start each board meeting with just a reminder of our work in action. And so our mission moment for today's meeting is this really cool book vending machine that Elena's company granted to 2 of our schools, and it's going to be added to 4 schools in the fall. So we'll have it at 6 total. It's called a bookworm vending machine, and you can see it here at Uplift Wisdom, which was one of the campuses that received it. And so basically, the children earn a token for being kind to another scholar or doing something wonderful above and beyond, and then their teacher has a stack of these tokens and can give them out to a student in their classroom. This is at a primary school. And then the children can go stick it in the vending machine and take home a book that becomes part of their home library, which is really great. And so there's everything from picture books for kindergartners and pre-Kers to chapter books. There's books that represent diverse characters. There's books about all sorts of interests that a child might have. So it's really neat, and we were so proud to do it with Anthem. And so thank you so much, Elena, for connecting us to the opportunity. And we are excited to expand it as part of our Building a Love of Literacy effort at our schools. So get some pictures of the kids getting their books for the first time. It was really, really fun. All right, with that.
All right. Well, are we going, we're going?
We're built the enrollment update into the finance update.
Okay, great. Jim?
Jim will lead the way. Thank you.
So today we're going to be spending most of our time on the 2023 fiscal year budget. But first, one last look at the 2022 enrollment. We were down just under 800 scholars, less scholars than our original budget. Attendance was 95.1 finalized for the year. This includes our state polled harmless numbers, cash and liquidity, and expenses were both positive over the year. So now to focus on the fiscal 23 budget. And I want to go over some key headlines. We're budgeting only 400 additional students. We are budgeting a reduction in several of our state revenue items, including Comp Ed and TEMA. This is because we have lower free and reduced eligible scholars during this school year, and that is driving state Comp Ed lower. TEMA put all these acronyms in the back for you all, is a biennial program from the state on instructional materials. We front-ended a lot of the spending in 22, so 23 over 22 is less because of that. It's on our revenue line. And then we were putting in no planned state increase in per pupil funding because this is not this is an off year in the legislative cycle, which, that cycle starts in January. So usually this off year, you don't get much, and we haven't heard anything. Finally then, line item 800, we have $8.1 million increase in payroll costs. This is due to COLA, our built-in salary schedules for educators, and then several of our newer schools are still scaling up sections. So like I said, at this point in time, several revenue items have not yet been determined, and we purposefully developed a conservative budget off of this because of this amount. We talked about these other items. One thing I didn't talk to you yet about is we're going to bring an amended budget for approval during the fall period, September, October, once we know both enrollment, where we stand, and also where we are with state funding rates. So the budget is built on 21,871 scholars for the average over the year. So what happens next? We're going to push internally to get our full house enrollment numbers up by the beginning of the school year. Right now, I'll go into more detail on another page, but we have 25,965 scholars that are in the pipeline, either signed up, both returning, new, and then some in the pipeline. During the summer, we also continue to collect new applications, and we have events at schools. We also do outreach to the families to determine if there's any change in their plans, so we know up front. It's interesting to note that historically our no-show rates can be as high as 10% on the first day of school, and that's divided 50-50. Here's going through a little. This is the path, trying to lay it out. This was going to be part of the presentation that Yasmin was going to do before this. But so right now we have 19,683 scholars that are returning and have turned in all their re-enrollment papers. We have 4,518 new scholars through the process so far this year. We have that have turned in their papers. We have 1,000 that are in process. So those three lines total 25,201. Our goal for first day full house is 25,965. So we're off. Our gap right now is 764. Now, all those numbers to the left are point in times. And remember, our budget number is based on the average for the year. That's why you see a big decline. It's because it's average for the year. That 25,965 first day, we have a big decline, and then we build it back up, and then throughout the year, depending on who leaves during the year, it gets smaller and smaller. So the 21,871 is an average that we use to build the budget. So we covered a lot of these. I don't want to spend much time, but things I haven't talked about yet. We're assuming a 95% average daily attendance rate. This is almost back to our historical 96% pre-pandemic levels. Also, I haven't talked yet about local revenue, which is going to be a little bit different this year, primarily due to two things. We are assuming in the budget that the federal lunch program will go back to pre-pandemic rules. This means if you don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, the scholar's going to have to pay, and that goes into the local revenue line. Also, for the first time in a while, we have higher interest rates that we're forecasting, so we're going to earn some money on our cash balances. Non-payroll costs. We have less COVID-driven expenses, a lot less COVID-driven expenses, but we're seeing cost pressures in several areas that I list on this page. We're also, the last point we're also doing several efforts to hold our cost base down. So non-payroll, we have pressure, but we're working on things to try to keep it in check.
Hey, Jen? Could you just quickly put in numbers, just given the inflation of our times, what the quantitative assumption is for the increase in per teacher salaries and the increase in per scholar revenue from the state? Like in numbers?
Well, right now, 0 for the state, because we don't know.
The budget says 0.
And
Okay, and hopefully you'll write in a little bit bigger number in the future when they give us that.
hopefully they give us it, yes.
Okay,
But it is not usually the time when they give large amounts,
okay.
because it's an off year. Okay, COLA, okay, so
COLA, yeah.
now let's go, a lot of our employees are on stair step, the educators, and that's like 75%. Those stair steps for each year of service, they get more money.
Right.
That whole stair step, we estimate to be 1.8%. And then the rest of the people get COLA, and we are approving, or want to approve 3% COLA for those people. They don't get experience steps.
3% and then plus 1.8 for the ones who get the experience step.
That's what the steps turn out to be as far as our cost base. On some of our nighttime cleaning costs, double digit.
Do we,
And you know, each spending category has different factors now.
do we have any general intelligence from the wider world about what teacher salaries seem to be doing in the area in view of the inflation that we're experiencing?
Well, everyone's in the same boat that we're in,
Yeah.
because we're in an off legislative cycle, and so
Right.
literally, the state would have to do something
Right.
out of the usual, because they have an approved budget for the 2 years, piece of it.
Right.
So right now, it seems like everybody's holding their current salary schedule, but superintendents are asking loudly, if we have inflationary cost pressures in other areas, the state can't possibly expect that we're going to be held flat this year. So I don't know, because that's not the mechanism they have. The mechanism they have is this session.
Biennium.
Yes, it's the biennium.
Can you find, if you have cost pressure with substitutes, can you find substitutes right now?
No, right now at the full capacity we need, and that's why we moved towards this past year of practice work continuing, which is what we call permanent substitutes. Every school has a permanent substitute, yes, on that specific school that they can deploy. But, you know, we had times last year where our campus had 10 staff members out at one given time. So then, like, teaching assistants, residents are covering classes, assistant principals are covering classrooms if we can't get the subs. We ran anywhere from 50 to 75% acceptance rates for sub jobs, depending on the time of year.
And that's what we had, vacancy rate was over 10%, it was 11 or 12% last year. Now, we're forecasting in this budget an 8% vacancy rate. We used to forecast 6, but it's going to be difficult this year with that. Even casualty, I mean, property's insurance is up over 25%. That's part of that is living in Texas and all the storms, but it's like every cost line has impact this year. So if we go to the next page, these are the numbers. I won't go into too much detail unless if you have questions. So our total revenue, we're budgeting at just under $293 million. And with the costs and all the federal revenues, including ESSER, we project that we're going to meet our debt service coverage ratio of 1.25x times. These are all the individual cost line items. We spoke about some of it, but this goes into more detail on what's going on the cost side. Any questions on this page? Okay. Moving forward, these are the key dates that we have concerning the budget. First thing is first day of school, because that's when we determine how many no-shows we have. It could be as high as 10%. In September, we should know what our actual per pupil rates are for the year. And a very important point is the fourth Friday in October. That's the snapshot. That's the only time you really, that's like your official enrollment for the year. And it also drives your federal spending on a lot of programs for the next year, based on the amount of people that are free and reduced lunch. They carry it over and say, if you had it this year, we're going to pay you federal funds next year for that same amount. And it's also, the snapshot date is very important for items like comp ed. Like what I showed you this year, we took a hit in comp ed because our numbers were down last October. And then, of course, the most important time of the year is going to be January, starting in January and February with the start of the biennial state legislative session. That's all I have for today.
Just a question on that snapshot. Is there anything we do internally with the parents, with the students, scholars to incentivize or help promote their being there on that particular day?
It's a collection.
It's not actually attendance on that day, it's just
Yeah.
our number of enrolled students, documented enrolled students.
See, that's, they pay butts in the seat, but on that particular day, you give them an enrollment number so they can.
So
you
even
can
if
have
they're
5%.
absent,
It
if they're
doesn't matter
enrolled
if
in
they're
absence,
absent.
then
That's
it's
fine.
Exactly.
And
It's a
that's
great
the only
question.
day, that's the only day of the year that the state cares about enrollment number. Everything else is what,
Right.
the butts in the seat.
We can also, we want to do this, are we going to Deborah first or approving the budget?
We don't need to go to Deborah anymore, we built the enrollment update in.
Okay.
So unless anyone has any questions about our enrollment efforts, Deborah or I can answer them, but otherwise, we built it into the finance update. Any questions on enrollment? It's going to be a slugfest for another couple months.
But it's good to see where we are though, because while we still show there's that almost 800 person gap, I think we've been worse, or at least last year, it seemed like we were in the worst shape. So, and I know we know where our pockets of issues are. So,
We do know where they're at.
any other questions?
Jim, I'm just thinking back to the discussion in the Finance Committee. Tell me if I have this right. This is an initial budget that we will update throughout the year
Yes.
as more information is learned,
Yeah.
per the milestones you mentioned. And I appreciated that it struck me that y'all took a pretty conservative approach to this initial budget, both in terms of the revenue lines and in terms of the cost lines. And just looking to others in the Finance Committee or Jim, just to confirm that as a budget that will be amended throughout the year, that struck me as a good, sensible, conservative
Yes.
start. And that was its intent.
And it's really odd that it's by law, we have to have a
Yeah.
budget approved by our fiscal year end, but the state doesn't have to tell us what our rates
But
are.
given that, this is a really good approach.
Yeah, most schools, for the board, general information, most of the public ISDs have August 31st year end, and some of our schools have also August 31st. Now, I know why. For what, in the past, we decided on the state, but we were a little bit behind, but never mattered much until the last 2 years. We always had some better knowledge on what our revenues would be. This year's with COVID and now post-COVID, it's just difficult to know what the state's doing.
So our attempt, which I appreciate John you raising, is to keep bringing you all more favorable budgets over the course of the year because we brought you the worst case scenario today. Cool.
Great. Again, it's all, I guess, part of the process that we've been through for many years now, where we start a budget, and even after we finish the year, we go back and reapprove the budget because the state allows us to continue to do that. So do I have a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 budget as presented? Michael, second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous consent. Our next item of business is review the network's current safety measures. And I'm going to turn it over to Alan Tolson for review. Thank you, Alan.
Jim, do you mind handing the clicker to Alan? Oh, thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
Yes, hi, I'm Alan Tollison, Regional Director of Operations. I also work closely with our safety implementation alongside Alex and Yasmin. And so today I'll share a little bit about what we do currently and then also look at the initial guidance we've seen post the Uvalde tragedy that we're hearing from the state. It's not super clear yet. They're just sort of giving us some initial areas of focus that very much align to some of what we know they've asked for in the past. It just appears to kind of emphasize some of those things. So we'll take a look at those. So currently, facilities and access control measures is a priority. And if you've been to our campuses, you've probably seen the electronic locking exterior doors and gates. We have a badge system that makes sure those doors are secured and locked. At main entrances, we have the vestibules, which are those double layers of locked doors where the receptionist sits. And of course, that's also where visitors sign in, and any visitors directed to those double layers of doors. We also have the Raptor system, which kind of screens, a quick background screen for visitors coming in, and then buttons that can notify 911. Our camera systems also are pretty comprehensive. We have a great field of view across all of our buildings, and they're available for remote access. So anybody, depending on the level of access they have, they can see what's going on at campuses in real time, from home or from up at CMO and those types of things. Another big point of emphasis that we're in our third year of from the state is this behavioral threat assessment teams. More and more they're realizing these attacks, often there are plenty of warning signs, and getting timely reporting, assessing and determining if a threat's credible, all that's just so important. We're really blessed to have dedicated social counselors at each campus. Just that continues to help us with, one, helping kids who are having struggles or issues before they turn into threats, or as they are initially seeing concerning things. That's been a major resource we've been able to lean on, and those counselors are part of our threat assessment teams at each site. It's usually the academic director, the counselor, and our ops directors who are on those teams. Other pieces are training. Of course, we have global annual training related to lockdown procedures, evacuation, the types of drills we do, as well as active shooter response. And then we, in addition to the virtual training, we do an on-site training for all teachers. Our operations directors at each campus, they're the facilities, office, and safety leads. So they are leaders kind of tasked with conducting drills, training folks on safety, and that's something we lean on to do the in-person, site-specific training in addition to the virtual pieces. Of course, our aim is to meet or exceed any of the expectations held for districts. Sometimes charters are kind of lost in the shuffle in terms of how we're given our asks from the state, but we make sure to try to meet the same things that will be asked of districts. And then we also lean on our Carline officer presence to have those a couple of hours in the morning and afternoon to get to know those officers who are often the community patrol officers, and that's just a major help to build those relationships, because that's all part of the community threat reporting and just kind of safety of the school community. We also create emergency operations plans at each site. We have one for the network and then one at each site that has indicates all the specifics, shut-off valves and evacuation sites and those very specific things, names for the crisis response team, et cetera, on those campus sites.
Alan, your other slide actually put with the audit.
Okay.
And so, Leslie, I'm going to take your question. I wanted to just give a quick disclaimer. We're happy to take any questions right now about our current approach. The commissioner is hosting a call on June 30th that Alan will be on, where we will get additional guidance of what is going to be expected, additional requirements with regards to school safety. And so in our August meeting, we are going to come back and share any enhancements that we are making, either that we've identified or that we have been directed to do on behalf of the state. So I would love for you to ask any questions now about what we currently do, but just know that we are using July post the state's guidance to do the next level of our own detailed safety enhancements for next school year. So with that, Rusty, you had our first question.
Yes, and certainly you could bring the answers back in that meeting too.
Sure.
It's really a question of what's the level that you see? How many incidents at any given school? I understand the school is completely made up of individuals, but as we're reading about mental health challenges in young people, does this data match up with what you see in the population? And again, you don't have to answer me to that.
That's okay.
I'm interested.
Yeah, we could pull the data from our social counselor team, but essentially we do track any threat that is assessed. There's as you can imagine, with social media and what's posted, what's a credible threat, what's not, they all have to be taken seriously. And so depending how you slice it, the numbers change pretty drastically. But certainly we can pull that together with the social counselor team.
I would say, Rusty, the rough numbers are probably 6 to 10 network, credible threats across the entire network, and a credible threat could be, we found a knife in a backpack, right? We have probably 24 non-credible threats, to Alan's point, on social media, where a child is saying, I'm going to harm the school, I'm going to harm someone, and then, we parent in, we assess the situation, the police get involved, and they're like, this is not a serious threat. But it actually does real trauma and psychological harm to everyone who's seen it on social media. And that's why we try to emphasize with parents, you have to watch what your child puts on social media and realize you're going to be held with serious consequence. We have to close school the next day because you said something crazy on social media that you weren't actually planning to do.
So 6 to 10 network.
Yes, and an example would be, knife in a backpack, which is obviously a serious thing.
And more we're
Thank you.
seeing the police departments notify them right away, even if at first it almost seems like, oh, this doesn't seem initially like something credible. They want to know, and they want for it to be a big deal when they interact with the family. So we're seeing that as well.
Any other questions? Great. You'll see more of this in August.
Thank you, Alan. And I would just say that every year, Alan and his team with one of the police officers who's assigned to Uplift, there's a meeting and the chair is required to attend, and we did this past April. And they go through a very detailed dive into, and there's actually community involved. It's a broader based requirement of safety at school that we go through. I think it's just now maybe going to another level in terms of the state mandates with all the new headlines. So we certainly thought it would be timely to make people aware that we do take it very seriously, and we do believe we're prepared, but you can't be over-prepared. I guess next I was going to turn it over to Remy for the academic update, including the 2022 STAR results.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to name that I added a few slides because data is literally coming out every day, and so in the pre-read, so there's some surprises in here if you've done the pre-read. So we've got a couple of different looks that you didn't get a chance to see before, but this is really high level because we've got tons of more data that you guys will get to see in September at the board retreat, where we'll go into greater detail across all the assessments that our scholars have taken. So it doesn't like I'm right here. So this is the executive summary, but these are the headlines, I would say, to take away from our scholar performance. One, I'm really happy to see the strong gains we saw in literacy in both primary and middle school. Our third grade scholars had their strongest STAR performance ever since we've been taking the STAR. And so it was really, really good to see. So thanks to the leadership of Priscilla Farms and her teams and all of our primary school leaders and our curriculum team on the effort they did to really push up those outcomes. I'll stick in the lines with literacy. You know, sometimes we don't spend a lot of time talking about social studies, but we will start to talk about it much more over the next coming years as the state is redoing the social studies standards. Beginning in the next year or so, we'll start to see more of that across the board. But we did see some increases in performance in 8th grade social studies and U.S. history, but they didn't quite get to the STAR 2019 performance level. And so that's something that we will continue to work on with our teams. With regards to STEM, and so when I say STEM, I'm talking about science and mathematics. We did see some growth. It was really challenging. Looking back at the data of where we started this year, we did see some growth, but the growth was much lower than what we saw in literacy. And so the team will be working over the next coming weeks on what's our plan for shoring up our scholar skill sets when it comes to mathematics. I've gotten a chance to look at the data by scholar groups. One of the things that stuck out to was really apparent in the data was when looking at our emerging bilingual scholars. And so that's our scholars who are learning English for the first time in our schools. We saw that our emerging bilingual literacy scholar scores and reading increased in primary and middle school. That's really strong. Our team really did focus on some specific strategies that they used in 3rd, 6th, and 9th grade. So we'll look at those grade levels in the deck in a moment. But what we noticed in 3rd grade, the strong performance that we saw with our emerging bilingual scholars is really what pushed up the performance of the overall grade level. So when we talk about closing gap closure, it's really important to see how, when moving one scholar group's performance, how that impacts the whole. And so I've tried to pull that out so we can see the impact of that today in today's presentation. In terms of school performance, that's on our next slide. Which way I'm pointing? Carrie, help me out.
Yes, ma'am.
We saw some really strong standout campus performance. If you guys were at the investors luncheon, you got a chance to meet Shermanda Fraser, the leader of Uplift Gratis. She went to Uplift Gratis, and they were one of our schools that back in 2019 was probably one of our lowest performing primary schools. And she's moved that school up to the top 1 through 4 schools and the network depending on the subject area. So it's just a really good testament of how leadership matters and that anything is possible. She did this, changed schools during a pandemic, and was able to have really exceptional outcomes on that campus. We saw the same with switching a leader up with Pinnacle Primary School. Their reading STAR scores increased tremendously. I do want to call out our new school performance. Starting a new school is really tough. You typically don't have all the grade levels, or if you do, you have small sections. But Uplift Crescendo, we started the school out in a way that we've never started a primary school. I think I've got that right. And that we started with all grade levels, and we saw really strong performance in both reading and mathematics at that campus. And so I thought that was a really good thing to really call out for that school leader and for that campus team and teachers. Our two newest high schools, Uplift Elevate and Uplift Ascend High Schools, had very strong starts. And they had above the network average in their overall pass rates in the 3 9th grade tested subject areas, Algebra 1, Biology, and English 1. And even Uplift Ascend High School, they did not have a biology teacher the full year, so that was like knock on wood. They were able to pull through some strong enough outcomes for that particular grade level. I did call out 2 additional schools, and we're looking at Fort Worth. Uplift Meridian Primary School, that was a school we really put a lot of targeted energy and time and changed out the leader there. So noticing that our schools that got strong, our strongest leaders, had some really exceptional gains. And so in the appendix, you'll get to see the strong grades that Uplift Meridian Primary School had across the board, and they outperformed their 2021 performance by far. And the Uplift Elevate Middle School, they had a pretty strong year during the pandemic last year, but they were able to grow even further this past year. That was their first year testing during the pandemic. So notice the 5 call-outs there are all from our Fort Worth sector. So super proud of those leaders and campuses for the work that they did this year. So I wanted to just do a couple of things just to talk about performance on STAR. So the STAR assessment, just STAR without EOC, is taken by our 3rd through 8th graders. and it assesses on reading, writing, mathematics, science, and social studies. Our end-of-course assessments are the assessments taken by our high school scholars that they have to pass in order to graduate from high school. How the test is scored, there's 4 levels a scholar can reach. Does not meet, meaning they did not meet the cutoff score for whatever particular assessment. And what that means is that that scholar needs significant intervention for the next upcoming school year to get on grade level. Then there's approaches. It says the scholar's not quite there yet, and so they can go through the next grade, but they will need intervention in order to be successful. Probably not as intense as the does not meet category, but probably just a level above that in terms of intensity to support them in meeting grade level. Then there's meet. Those are scholars who are predicted to be highly successful in the next grade level with or without academic intervention. So we're shooting for every single Uplift scholar to get into that meets category or above. Masters means that they are expected to be successful in that course level without any academic intervention. So those are the 4 scoring categories. For most of our report, you will only see meets and masters because we know that approaches, although the scholar did well enough to pass, we know that that scholar still needs intervention, and so we consider meets and masters our bar for excellence in our network. So let's take a look at literacy performance for reading English 1 and 2 and U.S. history. So we were able to get the data from Dallas ISD for grades 3 through 8. The 3 through 8 data, I believe, will be released by the end of this week. The state will release it, so we don't have other district comparisons on grade 3 through 8 testing. But when looking at our comparison, you'll see that in 3rd grade, again, I mentioned our highest performance where we have 41% of our scholars hitting meets or masters, and we had really strong growth across all 3 grade levels for our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, so double-digit increases over their 2021 performance. We go to the next slide. This is our middle school division. We see the same thing, double-digit increases in performance from their 2021 performance. And you see here on all 3 grade levels, they outperform DISD in terms of meets or masters on their reading assessment. Next, we're able to look at high school comparison data across different districts, and we'll look at a slide later where we'll get a chance to see a lot of other districts, but I was able to include Fort Worth ISD on this slide, and this is the addition to the deck that wasn't there in the pre-read. And so you'll notice that we didn't have as strong gains in literacy in our high school division, but still we were able to outperform our local district peers in terms of meets and masters rates on all 3 assessments. Well, this is what I called out earlier when talking about some of the headlines from our data. I pulled out grades 3, 6, and 9 because our ESL, our English as a Second Language team, really targeted focusing on vocabulary instruction with these 3 grade levels. The vocabulary strategy was intended to really lift the performance of our scholars who are emerging bilingual students. We see that if we look at STAR 2019, which is the blue bar, STAR 2021, which is the gray bar, and the red bar, STAR 2022, you'll see that in primary, they've outperformed their 2019 performance. Again, in 6th grade, you'll see that same impact as well, outperform their 2019 performance. But in 9th grade, we see this like stair step going the other way, which is typically not the trend we want to see. We don't see that same impact. Okay. I think there's a lot of other things. The assessment's very different, and there's a heavy writing component in that assessment, which points to a little bit of what our strategy will be next year, which is showing that some of the gains that we believe we saw in the overall pass rates for reading in 3rd and 6th grade also came from the strong gains that we saw in our emerging bilingual population of scholars. Here's another cut at the data and just showing you the gap, what the gap between emerging bilingual, which is the blue bar here, the non-emerging bilingual, which is the gray bar, and the red bar is the overall network average on the STAR assessments for grades 3, 6, and 9. You see in 3rd grade that bar is about 7 percentage points difference, and 6th grade you see that jumps to about 17 percentage points difference, and then in 9th grade it jumps to a larger number at 46 percentage points difference. So you see as scholars go up the continuum, that gap in performance is, this trend looks like this in in prior years, that increases as well. So that's something that our team will have to take under further investigation around. It's nice to have one strategy to have some impact, but obviously there's other strategies we need to employ in order to be able to close that gap as scholars are holding with us. Because it usually is the exact opposite. When something like this happens, you usually see as kids get older, they've been with us longer, gaps get to be much smaller, but this is going in the opposite direction. So although the positive growth we really appreciate, we've got to do something to see what's happening when scholars matriculate to ensure that they are able to close those literacy gaps between peer groups. So we'll switch gears over to STEM performance. So when looking at math, and this is we have the comparison data between Uplift and DISD, you'll notice we grew a lot, but boy did we have a low starting place to begin with after last year. We took a huge hit in terms of academic performance when it came to mathematics, and although we grew, we still are being outperformed by DISD and mathematics in our primary schools. We shift to middle school on the next slide. You'll see the same exists. We grew some, but 7th grade math is clearly a challenge not only for us but for multiple districts. But we still have a ways to go to improve our performance in mathematics in middle school as well. We'll go to the next one and look at Algebra 1 and biology. You'll see that this is probably the strongest growth we had was in Algebra 1 when it came to a mathematics subject area. But our scholars in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade take Algebra 1. So that is something to consider, that is a combination score for every district. But you'll see that DISD, we actually outperform them in overall pass rates, but their meets rates is much higher, is higher than us by 1 percentage point. And then in biology, we grew as well by 10 percentage points. We'll take a look really quickly at the emerging oh yes.
I just, because if we would have looked at this data years ago, we would have been ahead of DISD in every category. What are they doing in math, or what are we not doing in math that's created that gap?
I think there's a couple of things. I think last year was actually very challenging for us. We had switched to, going into the pandemic, we switched to a conceptual math curriculum in our primary schools. In the pandemic, we had switched to a conceptual math curriculum in our middle schools. That was like a year later. So switching curriculums is challenging to begin with. It is the right thing to do in terms of critical thinking. It is hard to do virtually when we first went virtually. So I think the step back that we took last year was huge in terms of making that shift to a much more rigorous curriculum. I think this year, you'll see that the growth, we've had more growth than them, but they had a stronger starting place than we did. And so I believe that what the team is thinking through together is how are we supporting our teachers and more effectively delivering the conceptual curriculum is something that we just have to work much harder at. And we have to do way more frequent mini assessments. So that's something that is traditional where you have more fluency or more low skill level, skills-based assessments. When you have a conceptual-based framework mathematics curriculum, you've got to infuse that into that curriculum, and our teachers are just getting used to being able to do that. And so I think we're just 1 year out from making the traction on switching to probably a much more rigorous curriculum. The challenge is the state is changing their assessment. And so it is more conceptually based. So these types of questions that our students are now used to having to encounter is more like what the assessments will look like going into the years after. This is our last year of this assessment cycle. So almost next year will almost be like a year one for every single district in the state. So it's buckle up a little bit in terms of how scholars are going to perform on a whole new set of assessments for both literacy and mathematics. But I think our switch to the conceptual framework, we took a few steps back, but I think in the long run it is something that will strengthen our scholars' mathematics performance.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to be on the same topic, and maybe it's a discussion for September. I'm not asking whether the conceptual approach is the right approach or anything, and I wouldn't know. But how and why are we confident that we are truly on track and not there yet, as opposed to we're not yet on track?
Yeah, so I
And it
think,
sounds to me that at least when you look at the data, we must have places where we're not yet on track.
well, I mean, yes, right, we gotta talk about, we're going across 45 schools. So
Yeah.
that looks very
Exactly.
different in different schools in
Exactly.
terms of level. Like, you know, when we look at Uplift Grads, they have strong performance in
Yeah.
mathematics, or Uplift Christian does strong performance. And so it really comes to, right, like there's so many factors this year around, but it really comes to like efficacy and instruction, right? And what structures you have in place for strong intervention is really the nuts and bolts of what has to happen. So being not there yet, in terms of having that across all 45 schools, I can say that we're not there yet in terms of our having the right supports to make sure that our teachers are strong in the areas they need to. Why we're not there yet, though, John, is because the state is switching to a conceptually based learning framework. So the instruction, the type of assessment that our scholars are taking is more like lower level in terms of what scholars are supposed to be able to do mathematically to get to higher levels of math. The state they understand that, and that's why they're making the switch to the conceptual framework. So when I say we're on the right track, we have the resources and material, but it's one thing to have curriculum. It's a whole other thing to ensure that people are able to teach, leverage the curriculum, and that is the part where we have to strengthen our practice. So that's what I mean by in terms of we've got the stuff. The assessment will be aligned to what we need it to be, but how do we make sure our teachers and leaders are able to leverage it and make sure scholars are getting the most out of it is where our team has to get stronger at delivering on. And it's just a challenging year. Like we've got vacancies, you know, like that's why it's been so unpredictable in terms of how that comes out because we've got all these moving variables on every different campus that's impacting the efficacy of even the support we offer.
What struck me as I was reading through the materials and as we're going through this again, kind of building off, John, what you were commenting on, was that we're looking at a set of lagging indicators, and then we talk about being on track. What are our, I don't know, our KPIs, what are our leading indicators so that we're not waiting another year to see results and we can course correct very quickly?
Yeah, so like that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of the things that we have to include and add into our practice, more frequent, smaller assessments. So because usually for a conceptual lesson, it's building on this really nice thread of learning and all these great things. You get this one big assessment at the end that's rubric-based, which is wonderful. That's how IB wants scholars to learn, and that's how scholars think critically. It does not work when you're preparing a scholar for a standardized assessment. So what we have to add is these like maybe 3-week mini assessments that the teachers are able to look at and say, hey, this is like a prerequisite skill that this group of scholars has not mastered. How do we respond to that and be able to course correct before we get to April, May of 2023 and say, oh my gosh, our scholars don't know this basic, this very basic skill set. So one of the parts of and we'll talk about it, I was in development, my team, we have to react to this data a bit too, is doing more frequent mini assessments that give us just more indicators in terms of what scholars are actually mastering and where do we need to align our supports for our teachers, to be able to close some of those skill gaps. I think that is really the tricky part is that what we saw last year, especially when you have a pre-made curriculum, it's very easy, where teachers were, I totally understand, to pick up the curriculum and keep going. This is what I'm doing today, this is the lesson we're going to do, we're going to go on to the next one. It's a whole other thing to stop and pause and say, whoa, after this lesson I have 6 kids who just didn't get it. It's great, they're able to identify that, well, what do I do when that happens? And that is what we really have to develop our muscle around is how do we find those moments quickly? How do we give teachers what they need in order to respond? So that is really the work that I think will be the difference maker for us to close some of these gaps way quicker and be able to respond. If you recall when I went over the data, I don't expect anyone to recall, when I went over the data for the end of first semester, math was probably right about where it was now. When we went to quarter 3, we were expecting to see some pop, a little bit more growth. It was completely flat. And so what we didn't do, in terms of what we didn't notice from quarter 2 to quarter 3, is that there was something across the board from our response. The scholars really didn't take that next step to really make the extra the extra gains that we expected them to from quarter 2 to 3 and quarter 3 to 4. And so I think it's really our reaction to and having teachers skilled enough to be able to react is really where we want to put our energy into. So on this one, I was just calling out the bilingual scholar daily performance. And so on this particular slide, you'll see in math, except for in middle schools, there's like an anomaly a bit. Like that gap seems, there's no real gap in performance when looking at 3rd and 9th grade, but in middle school, there is when compared to their the emerging bilingual and non-emerging bilingual peers. And so again, that's another area we'll have to dive deeper into, because typically in math, when it comes to emerging bilingual scholars, that usually don't see much of a gap in terms of performance, but we see that in our middle school scholar groups. That requires a little bit more investigation as to why and how we'll respond to that gap in performance. Yes.
Could you give a short description of what you consider the demographic non-emerging bilingual committee?
Yeah. So scholars are classified as emerging, but there's actually multiple categories. There's emerging bilingual, and then usually scholars, as they progress, will test out of it. There's a test that comes out of it. So then you go into, you did well enough, but you're still being monitored after year 1. You did well enough after year 1, it's like several years of monitoring before you will completely exit the program. So non-emergent bilingual are scholars who've completely exited. The scholars who are monitored are not included in that number.
Thank you.
So, and looking deeper at our Fort Worth Schools performance, so this is a funny slide because I didn't have the Fort Worth ISD grades 3 through 8 comparison, so I thought it'd be a good idea to compare the performance of our Fort Worth schools to our network average, and then do the growth of our Fort Worth schools based on their performance last year, and then our network performance last year. So on this one, this goes through and shows you that on average, on every grade level and reading, although our Fort Worth scholars grew a great deal in literacy, you can see they grew at sometimes higher rate than their peers around the network. They still are lower than our network average across many of the grade levels, but we can see that that gap is closing, closed quite a bit this current school year. If we go on to the next slide, we'll look at the mathematics numbers, and we'll see not quite similar. They still are outperformed by their network peers, but we do see that there was still some growth in grades 3 through 6, but took a few steps back in grades 7 and 8 at our Fort Worth middle schools. When looking at our high school data, I was able to do the Uplift average. So this is a new slide that's not in your pre-read. The Uplift network average, again, you've seen this in the earlier slide, but now I've got the Uplift Fort Worth school performance on the STAR end of course assessment and compared that to the Fort Worth ISD STAR end of course assessment. And so you'll see that across the board and both English 1 and 2, they have the strongest growth over the network and over Fort Worth ISD, and perform and have a higher meets master rates in English 1 and 2. You'll see in U.S. history, they're a little bit below the Fort Worth ISD and had the smallest growth in that area. But I'm going to name that that's just one high school when it comes to 11th grade. That's Uplift Mighty. They don't have, Uplift Elevate and Uplift Ascend don't have 11th graders yet. So it's really one high school that we're comparing. So it's one teacher compared to the entire Fort Worth ISD district. If we go on to the next slide, it just finishes out with Algebra 1 and Biology. And you'll see that the Fort Worth high schools have a higher meets master's rate in Algebra 1 than Fort Worth ISD, but in biology lag behind in their meets master's rate. Go on to the next slide. This is also a new set of data before I talk about our priorities and next steps and goals. We'll look at the district comparisons, Carrie, where you guys can see there's a lot of numbers here. And so I'm going to try to orient your eyes to look at the rows. So what I talked about earlier, we have approaches meets masters when it comes to passing the STAR assessment. And you'll look at the comparison. If you just look at Algebra 1, if you just go through the through line for approaches as overall pass, you'll see that our overall pass rate is higher than our neighboring districts of DISD, Fort Worth, Irving, Arlington, and Grand Prairie. You'll see that that's the case in all of the pass rates for all of the end of course assessment subject areas. There are a couple where I think our meets rate is lower than one or two districts, but overall, our overall passing rate is higher than our peer districts in the area. If you look here, this is a comparison to our charter peers. So looking at Yes Prep, that's based down in Houston, Kit, Texas, that has schools in a couple different parts here of Texas, and then IDEA as well. And you'll see that we're probably number 2 in terms of pass rates when it comes to end of course assessments. IDEA had the strongest pass rates, and they actually have always had the strongest pass rates in STAR end of course assessments. And so each school actually took a step back in terms of overall pass rates. Even IDEA's pass rates are typically higher than what they are, but they still have their 5 to 10 point advantage over us in terms of their overall pass rates on end of course assessments. So before I go into like vision goals and next steps, anybody have questions just about any of the data?
I think my biggest question is, when you're out trying to recruit families and scholars, are people conscious of and doing these comparisons and asking hard questions like why, if the district, what's your value add, if, et cetera? Do you actually get confronted with this data when you're out looking for scholars?
I'll speak about high school, and I'll ask like Deborah and Yasmin to chime in. In high school, no one ever mentions end of course assessment scores. They usually mention, does your school have dual credit? And can they earn an associate's degree at your school? Obviously, that's probably the number 1 thing. And maybe number 2, maybe athletics they may ask about. What kind of activities, I would say, is probably the general question that people would ask, but very rarely it's more about how many credits will my kid have to go into college after finishing your school is generally the question you get with high school recruitment.
And then Rusty, we answer, we have the IB program, the diploma program, and it goes right over like your head. So I wish that there was more looking at the data. We try to insert it in, but we have to be cautious because it can just be too much outside of like short sound bites. That's all it
Yeah, I would just say that usually parents don't ask. They'll know if they're an A-rated, B-rated, C school, and then some are just more sophisticated than others. But if the school feels good to them and they like the school leader and they like the environment, it just becomes almost a non-issue. But I will say, if they're out shopping around, other school districts will say, well, look at Uplift, they're a blah, blah, blah rated compared to us, right? So other people, we do that too, right? Look at us compared to your choices, we're better because of this. So it's not the main driving factor, but it does come into play somewhat.
So shifting gears a little bit, and we'll get an opportunity to talk about this in greater detail at the board retreat. But our entire senior leadership team came together to think about strategic planning, because this is obviously a very unusual year that we just came out of, and just have such opportunity to build off of what we learned. And so they came together to come up with this vision statement for who we are as a network and what we want to do with our priorities. And the biggest headlines here is being in a high achieving IB network is our priority, and really looking at our students from as thriving individuals, taking pride in their own cultures and being critical thinkers and being prepared for college and career. So when we go to the next slide, this is where our goals come into play. So we wanted our goals to be in line with what we said we wanted to be as a network and where our strategies are. And so you'll see that the strategies, I know we had a lot of dialogue last time about our scholar achievement goal. And so you'll see that's the first goal that we have up top, around 50% of our students meeting math and reading hitting needs math and reading assessments to reduce performance gaps aligns to our House Goal 3 goals. And we'll go over those at a later time so you guys can see what the Scholar goals are by demographic group. But we've set goals for this year. We want those goals to build as we get to 25-26, where we want to be at 70% needs in math and reading from an academic standpoint. And then the other goals that you guys have seen before as well. These are the strategies that we are really working towards. So Yasmin had a quick conversation today, and we talked about IDEA in terms of their performance. When you look at IDEA's pass rates and their meets master's grades, one of the advantages that they have is that they really can have true intervention. When you are scoring 90% of your students are passing and 70% or more are hitting the meets masters, that means you've got 30% of your students where you can have targeted and successful interventions where you can really dedicate your staff and energy toward. We've got to get to a point where we can balance the load between nailing the regular instruction and having intervention. And so what we're prioritizing this year is how do we just nail the instructional block? So when I talked about how do we make sure our teachers are prepared for conceptual math, or how do we make sure they're able to respond when students don't know a certain concept, that is where we want to focus our energy and really build like those foundational building blocks for responding to students' needs, but also delivering really great and effective first-time instruction. The second part is just the scholar experience. Like, scholars have to come to school in order to be successful, and so they want to have. We should make sure that there's a joyful experience for our students, and so we want to focus on some of those extracurricular and social experiences that our scholars should have in order to just bring more joy to the learning experience. And so we will put a lot of energy there into this upcoming school year. Those are two things that we're really focusing on this year in order to really up the engagement at our schools, but also the academic performance. If we go one slide further, I'll just go to just a little bit more detail, and all you have to do is pay attention to is the green down at the bottom. These are the things that we'll be focusing with our leaders on. What does effective whole group instruction look like, and how do we respond to scholar data? Just having more purposeful data cycles and supporting them with responding to that. And the scholar experience end, we're really going to talk about how do we have that impactful and intentional advisory. Every scholar, every school in Uplift has 30 minutes at the start of each day for scholars to engage in advisory. That is an opportunity for us to leverage our social emotional learning curriculum, but also a space to build community for our scholars. And so we want to be really intentional about what is that experience if scholars are getting true benefit from just building community with each other. And then just our focus on athletics and co-curricular opportunities. If we go to the next slide, I'll just share a few next steps that our team is working on the few weeks that are left in the summer. It felt like we had a lot of time, but every day I look at the calendar like, my goodness.
They're coming back soon.
Yes. My team, this week we will wrap up our plan for math acceleration. We'll have an opportunity. We haven't got the full data set we only have literally the raw data. We'll get the full data set where we'll get to see where our scholars really need in those areas of support. That'll help further us to develop the plan to really focus in on mathematics. The next is just doing two things. So when we saw our data at the end of second and third quarter, like, my goodness, we really need to focus on literacy. And we really turned on the afterburners and jets to really get after our literacy performance. That also meant that people took their eye away from some of the other subjects like social studies, like science, like mathematics, because we thought we had it. So we realized we can't do that. So we have to figure out how do we make sure we're balanced when we do see a problem area, that we support leaders in fixing that gap, but also we are making sure we're monitoring what's happening in the other areas and responding. So it's a second area we want to focus in with our school leaders on how to do that and manage that. The next is just having teacher and leader development throughout the year that's differentiated. We just got a large gamut of teachers. We've got novice teachers, we've got really experienced teachers. We have teachers who started during COVID, which is a very different way to start an education career. And so everyone's needs are so diverse, and so we just have the opportunity and responsibility to make sure we're giving the right PD for people when they need it, as opposed to some of our one-size-fits-all model where we just think that people will get more out of things that are more tailored to their needs. And the last one is just looking at our comprehensive summer programming, just keeping an eye on what's working, and how do we make sure scholars are getting the most out of that experience. Because one of the things that's hidden in here that you guys don't see, and you'll see when we look at map data, is that we saw that we were able to have less summer slide last year due to, I'm assuming due to our summer programming that we had for our K through 8 scholars. And so when we look at map data, we'll go ahead and look at that in September. But if we're able to just make sure students are retaining as much learning as possible over the summer, I think it just gives us a stronger starting place for the beginning of the school year. So that's all I have for you guys tonight. If you have any questions about the way forward. And then there's like the 30-slide appendix.
And also note to the board, those new slides that were in your pre-read, so that way you have them of the charter school and the district comparison. And of course, next month when we have 3rd through 8th data, we'll do the same and send those out.
Really, thank you very much. I know it's a lot of data that you and your group have gone through over the last 2-3 weeks, and it's just amazing looking at all the information and how much improvement that we actually have seen. And I know it's encouraging when you see that, and I know it's discouraging when you don't get the other results you want, but if we have a clear path, it certainly will make it easier. The next item on our agenda is our annual board and officer election. I'm going to hand it over to Alex to review the results.
Great, thanks, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. Great news, and excited to say we had 100% response on the election, the survey. Thanks to Yasmin for the gentle pushes.
I said, don't be on my naughty list.
That's right, don't be on our naughty list. And you weren't, so thank you for that. Yeah, so 100% response. All candidates have been unanimously elected into their respective roles. So congrats to all. And just a reminder, those positions will go into effect July 1. So what we do every year after we do the survey and get all the ballots in, we take a vote for the board to approve the election results. So Richard, I will hand it back to you for that.
Okay. This should be pretty easy. Do I have a motion to approve the results of the 2023 fiscal year annual board and officer election as presented? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote.
Richard, or can I ask a quick question too?
Yeah, sure.
Because as board members, we have responsibilities. Could we send out the sheet that sort of says what we need to do?
Yes.
Second, some of those were paused during COVID.
Yes.
Are those going to be reinstated as we go into the new school year in terms of visiting a campus and?
Sure, that's
Right?
great. Yes.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
And then second to that is the education hours we need to do. Can you send that out sooner, right?
The education hours, for sure.
Just so I'm not at the end to kind of catch up and do those?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. So good. Okay, well, Richard literally was like, I'm going to get up and leave this meeting. I'm done.
Can't do it just yet.
Yeah, literally, right? Column doesn't start till July 1st.
No, I thought it was after the vote.
No, it's not after the vote. Like, you gotta hang in there a little longer. So, I'd like to just offer first some words of appreciation for Richard, and then I know Colin would like to share, and anyone else is welcome to chime in as well. So I have to always tease Richard about this. When he became vice chair with Ryan, he was like, you know, Yasmin, I'm finishing up a decade of service on the Uplift board, and I've never been chair. And so I think I really want to be chair. I want to give my leadership gifts. This is like a pretty easy gig, right? It's just like a well-oiled machine. And literally, like in March, COVID happens, and in June, Richard steps into this role as chair, and his whole 2 years as chair has been the most challenging 2 years we've ever had. And so, but he's been amazing as chair during those 2 years. There are many things I appreciate about Richard. I appreciate his just always like, he's like very even-keeled, very steadfast, and we've had lots of hot topics over the past 2 years to navigate. And And I really have just appreciated his balanced perspective, like nothing rattles him, and that has been really helpful. He also has been incredibly accessible. He's like blocking my email from now on going forward. But there were many things that were hitting us, especially in that first year, just on an ongoing basis, and requests to TA and decisions that had to be made and weighed. And so I felt like I was on the phone with Richard and Cullen all the time, and they both were so gracious to give even more time than is normally required. And then Richard has a great sense of humor too, so I also appreciate how he can just keep things lighthearted when it feels really heavy in those moments. So I've appreciated his thought partnership, and again, his leadership during what at least have been my 2 hardest years at Uplift. So thank you to Richard. And we have a standard board chair gift, which is a engraved pen with his years of service. Do you still have yours, Tom?
I still have it.
Okay, so nobody lost it. Melissa said she has hers. Did you bring it?
No, I should have. It's at the office, but I do have it.
You do have it, it's on your door. Okay, awesome. So thank you, Richard, very,
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
I think the themes I want to touch on are pretty similar and maybe a little repetitive, but I do kind of want to say them once in front of the board, even if they're a little bit repetitive. As I think everybody knows, we have a system in which the chair and the vice chair and the CEO have weekly conversations. Sometimes, particularly in these extraordinary days we've been living through, it's more frequent. And so I've had the opportunity to see Richard's leadership at work very much up close for the last 2 years. And I will say, by the way, I think it's a really good system that has served us well, because it has meant that every person who has come into the chair job has done so very familiar with the issues, and without fail, having been an understudy to really great leaders every step of the way. So I'll second what Yasmin said. When Richard came into this job, he came into big shoes that had been filled by everyone from the great Phil Montgomery to Melissa McNeil, Tony Donna, and 2 other great people. Kevin and Ryan, all great people. And you know, just like Yasmin said, when I oftentimes say to friends, when I came on the Uplift board of the first year or 2, I always said, you know, it's like a really well-oiled machine. I'm not even sure if I do add value, I try, you know, but everything's going so smoothly. But I think that it is accurate to say that that Richard drew the shortest of straws when it came to deciding when to be the board chair. And I don't have to say, obviously, it's very clear that the organization has faced unbelievable complexity and a fair bit of adversity over the last couple of years. And Yasmin and our whole executive team, everyone has risen to the occasion. I know this board is very proud of what the whole organization has done. I think that it is not always so clear what a significant role Richard has played through this over the last couple of years. We have a very great responsibility in this board, and I think oftentimes when we're in the heat of it, we don't necessarily see the ways in which the board sort of provides an even keel and helps to keep everybody centered on the mission of the place. Through these challenging times, I'll second what Yasmin has said, Richard has been steady and steadfast, analytical, funny, unflappable, principled and kind, and above all, totally dedicated to doing what's right for our 22,000 scholars and our whole organization. It's been really quite something to watch. I will just say, in a very quick moment looking to, I was going to say also, and through it all, it's also become a really good friend. And I was going to say, one quick moment looking to the future, I'm beyond delighted to have the privilege of sharing these next 2 years with Dr. Lael Melville. And we'll be very thankful. So, on behalf of a grateful board, thank you for your many years of service to Uplift, and I hope there are many more to come. We'll have a seat warm, just as we've had seats for these folks. And above all, thank you for 2 magnificent years of leadership and commitment. Have a great summer. Enjoy your post-board chair times. You certainly are.
Thank you very much. Well, I just really want to thank everybody who's served in this role either on the board and the executive committee where we've had a lot of conversation, a lot of action to deal with over the last 2 years. But also the staff, Yasmin and her team have just been great to work with. And it does make our job a lot easier, even in the challenging times that we have. And so I just know I've gotten tons out of this role over the last 2 years, over the last 4 years, or over the accumulation of a lot of time. And, you know, it was a joy to do it. It was a joy to be a part of the mission. And again, I don't think this will be the last time you see me, but it will be the last time you see me as board chair.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Just pass this over.
You can now dismiss everyone who's not staying for closed session.
Okay, so at this time, we're going to move into the executive committee portion of the meeting. Any non-executive members are welcome to stay, but because the remaining items are administrative in nature and rather than informal, you're more than welcome to head home early. So for those who want to leave, we can also, for those who need a 5-minute break.
Okay.
5-minute break. Everyone else takes a 5-minute break.
Do I need to, well, so the time is now,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, the time is now 5:58. We'll go back into closed session.
No, open session.
Open session, I'm sorry. We'll go back into open session. I'm now going to turn it over to Alex to introduce, hear from you on 2 administrative items.
Great, thanks, thank you, Richard. We have 2 administrative action items this afternoon. One is a resolution, the other is approving the safety audit results reports, both of which were in y'all's pre-read. The first deals with, again, resolution it's for forgiving overpayments for insurance premiums for benefits. In short, kind of the long and short of this is that this year we had a handful of employees whose insurance premium benefit deductible was not taken out of their paycheck. The result was that their paychecks were higher in those impacted months than they should have been. Similar to what had happened last year, this year was on a much, much smaller scale. The people team really has done an incredible job of implementing an application support tool to assist in what we call this kind of reconciliation process to help ensure that these situations don't help. So again, it was on a much, much smaller scale this year. We're coming to the board to ask to approve that we go ahead and cover the cost of the deductibles that weren't taken out of the paychecks, really for 2 reasons. One, the timing of the reconciliation process really makes it impractical for us to go in at this time the way our fiscal year is set out, to go in and seek reimbursements from the employee. So it's not a practical process to go through, and given the much smaller sum that we're dealing with this year versus last year, just does not make sense to go through those hoops, so to speak. And number 2, like last year, maybe to a smaller extent, but this year we still obviously had COVID and the impact of COVID on our staff. Obviously impacted a great number of them. So again, to sort of assist in removing any additional stress and hardship on our employees, again, asking that we not seek reimbursements for the overpayments. Are there any questions on the resolution?
I have a couple, real quick.
Sure.
I favor the resolution, so I'll be brief.
Yeah.
One, I did the period, I didn't see the actual dollar amount.
Yeah, it's around $50,000. And just also as like a quick disclaimer, our process has been manual, like a very time-intensive reconciliation process, and Anne just moved over to a process that's more automated, so we should be catching these things.
That gets
last year.
my, that gets my second, one that helps too, I just
Yeah.
the dollar amount. 2, They just deal with audit committee person than me.
Yeah,
Too many audit committees I'm on. If it hasn't been looked at already, I would have the audit committee put this on the list of things to review.
Yeah,
Because this could be a serious, I know it's not, but this is the kind of thing that can be a very serious control issue.
yeah,
And we don't want any discretion in somebody saying, I'm going to let this person not pay and somebody else does have to pay.
yeah.
So I favor the resolution.
Yeah.
Answer my 2 questions.
Perfect, cool. We'll
Thanks,
do
John.
that.
Yeah. Any other questions on the resolution?
We want to go ahead and take action on that now.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do it?
Do I hear a motion to approve the resolution approving the forgiveness of overpayments for insurance premiums for benefits for a handful of employees?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Do I hear any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote.
Great. Thank you, Richard. The second one, again, consider and take action on approving safety audit results. Alan Tollison, one of our regional directors of operation, and who certainly does an amazing job heading up our safety work here, is here to chat about the safety audit. Has a couple of slides. I don't know
Yep,
if-
Rodney's got him.
Yeah.
Coming.
If not, we can work around it.
She's got it. A woman of many
Yeah.
talents.
I mean, I'll say just state generally while we're waiting, the purpose for the audit result is statutory in nature. The education code requires every charter and ISD in the state to go through one of these audits once every 3 years. We did receive a certificate. It was in the pre-read, identifying that we were compliant with all minimum safety standards. So really great news there. There were certainly some recommendations in there that we're all aware of. I'll let Alan kind of speak to that, but really great news that we were found to be in compliance. Kind of have to take it in context. This was all done pre-Uvalde. And as Yasmin shared earlier, we expect there to be a lot more information coming to us in the weeks, hopefully on June 30th, maybe post June 30th. And obviously we'll be doing a lot of work and paying a lot of attention to this stuff moving forward. So Alan, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Districts and charters are required on a 3-year cycle to have recommended auditors through the Texas State Safety Center come through and examine all your campuses. They do an intruder assessment, facility site visits, and they look at documents like the Scholar Handbook and climate survey results and those types of things. And then they give you very in-depth information in terms of what they recommend you look at addressing. Of course, some of it's low-hanging fruit. Of course, with those items, we immediately have our operations directors like, hey, let's go ahead and knock this out. Others might have more of a cost affiliated with it. In some of those we build into our planning, which I'll talk about here shortly. And then others, we're kind of waiting for the other bits of information from the state to say, hey, well, what are the expectations going to be? What sort of funding should we expect or not expect? And so the bright spots they shared with us were that operations directors were just valuable safety leaders. Because they're at every campus, they're able to focus on that non-instructional stuff, and that's been an effective model in terms of having someone just locked in on drills and facilities, upkeep, and those types of things. Also, they really shouted out the student code of conduct, and then at the time, we had COVID protocol in place, and so they gave us some recognition there. Areas that we're in the process of addressing would be one, camera and electronic card system issues. Those have been resolved at the time. It wasn't that doors were unlocking, it was just certain teachers didn't have a badge due to some system issues that were going on with our IT side of the house. That's since been resolved, but again, it was never making the perimeter unsecure. It was simply systems with the badges acting up. Increasing large campus signage. This was something from the audit that, and we're hearing some guidance from the state as well. Part of where it kind of went wrong in Uvalde was how different police departments communicated with one another. So say the sheriff's department shows up and city police are there, and the FBI shows up. who's in charge, getting that sort of sorted out. But what campuses can do is having maps and signage as clear-cut, easy to read, and quickly comprehend as possible is a major recommendation they're giving across campuses. And so we've already started some of that work because it's been shared as a good idea from the police departments we've talked to. We're just going to kind of further that and then build in as we talk with facilities planning and more long-term planning with construction, just making sure we're looking at, hey, do we need kind of more obvious signage in certain places while we wait to see what specifics the state gives us in terms of how to label, be it outdoor exterior windows for classrooms and that sort of stuff. So we're midstream with that, but definitely watching it closely and moving forward. Health services, we made a lot of solid gains based on their feedback, but also just in state asks. Training all of our health services staff on the Stop the Bleed and triage training. Unfortunately, that's responding to an active shooter event and how you can prevent so many more casualties if staff on site know how to handle injured people. And health services are now trained in them much more extensively than they have been in the past. And then we have CPR trainers in-house. So essentially anyone in network that wants to receive CPR training, we have that resource in-house, and so a lot easier to move forward with. And then kind of simple ones we've already started, but we'll continue to build out is just for this coming school year, instead of these sort of just facilities walks or litter walks where you're kind of watching for security, just building in very intentional security perimeter walks in addition to our camera checks throughout the day. And then we're updating our EOP format just on some new requirements that have come out as well. And we've updated some of those pieces, including the infectious disease pieces and reunification, and then we're working on the continuity of operations specifics right now.
One thing I learned in going through that audit that we went through is that the fire departments have all the campus maps that the police departments don't. So one of the reasons why they mentioned this signage is because the police departments don't always know where to go, but the fire departments have all that data.
And they use two different systems.
And they use different systems. So it was just interesting to hear, why some of these issues occur or out there. But
That's part of why we love those car line officers too, because so often they're the community responders, so they're chatting, working car line most days, getting to know the staff and campuses while they're watching, and so if something does happen, they have that connection and understanding of the campus that's been pretty helpful.
is there any questions for Alan? If
In
not,
your-
yeah, go ahead.
In your research of this best practices, are there any rules or code of conduct for adults in the buildings?
Can you say more?
So, just going back to that event where a door was left open by a teacher. I'm trying not to assess blame, so I want you to hear what I'm saying about, I don't know how else to say it, like,
Of course.
are there written rules of responsibility for the adults who are in the building?
Absolutely, and we hit that hard with the training, because if you have expensive, fantastic, electronic locking systems, they do nothing if people are propping doors and letting people come in side doors and that sort of thing. So yes, we train teachers on that, and then we have our operations director and facilities team checking doors. We train everybody unprop a door if you see it, but certainly yes, no one should be ever propping those doors. We also do internal audits separate from this formal audit, where we do at least once per semester visit every campus, and we do that very thing, like see if we can get in. It's a big deal if we find any gaps there. But by and large, our campuses, we've made that a big point of emphasis for the last few years. So it's pretty solid practice in terms of keeping the perimeters we have secure with the tools we have.
Okay, but not a formal,
There's not a formal disciplinary process, right?
Got it.
So,
Okay.
because sometimes we might not even know who did it, right? Like an ops director might walk by a door and see a prompt, and they go and unprop it. But we might not know who was the original one who
got it.
propped it open, and like trying to help a colleague. Oh, Richard's 2 minutes behind me picking up lunch. He forgot his badge. I'll just like put a book in the door to profit because I know it's faster for him to come in through the back staircase, you know, not really realizing what a huge safety risk that is. And I don't think there's any malintent to it, but sometimes people aren't always thinking through the grave consequences there can be. So yes, it's written, yes, people are trained to do it, but it is not always possible to hold people accountable for it who do prop open doors if we don't know who the person did it, or we don't go back to the video and then say, okay, you're getting first a verbal warning and then a write-up and following our, you know, discipline consequence.
And I guess that's where I am
Yeah.
with the concept. I think I have a badge for DFW Airport, and let me tell you, if I let someone piggyback on me coming through a door, be for sure,
Yeah.
there will be consequences.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's
Sure.
that important
Sure.
that it shouldn't, training, yes, I absolutely agree with everything you're saying, but
Yeah.
without the consequences, without someone thinking, someone's gonna look at this camera,
Sure.
so you better go
Yeah.
around front, like, I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah.
wanna, and that's what I do at the airport. If anybody ever tries to come behind me, you're not getting me in trouble, sir.
Yeah.
No, we're not supposed to do that, and I don't feel bad about it, because
Of
we've
course
all
not.
been trained that way.
Sure.
So, that's
Yeah, got it. Yeah, feedback taken.
Any other comments or questions? If not, do I have a motion to approve the safety audit results?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mel. Are there any votes against the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved by unanimous vote.
Great, thanks, Richard. So we're going to now move into the parent grievance appeal, parent QV. I'm going to check outside. Last we had looked at checking all afternoon, early evening. The parent has not arrived. As of the last time I was outside. Still don't think the parent has, but I just want to double check. I'm going to bring in our team and we will get moving on it. Of course, if the parent is not here, we still do the hearing. So let me grab everybody and we will get moving on.
And we tried to call parents too. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Great work.
We are going to get started. We've had daily conversations with the parent on the logistics. And so we feel confident that we've had strong communication and we're going to bring our team in just for this meeting. Because we do need resolution for the campus.
No telling,
This time?
the drill,
Yeah, this what happens about this hour. So unless we're bringing something else in.
Uh,
Yeah.
funny.
Are they building out a floor?
It's not cute to go.
There you go.
That's why I'm so familiar with
Just
this.
let it whisper in your ear.
Everything about this is upland, okay?
Go.
11th floor.
Yeah, it's all the 11th
Yeah.
floor of the-
So are they constructing something on 11?
Oh, no, not on 11.
Maybe at 12.
It must be at 12.
we pointed it out today.
Yeah, because 10 is only half of us, and half is us. The
Oh,
other half,
really?
they're gonna go out, so like we were.
It's not built yet, yeah. Okay.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's some stuff you could live in. Sounds like some
They were not our celebration dinner tonight.
still deserve that cocktail somewhere.
I might have a cocktail.
There you go. There you go. It's been 12 hours.
Again, I did that yesterday, so. Hello. Hi.
Thanks for the help earlier.
You killed a couple of trees.
That's right.
Thank you.
Is every deal required to print these in paper? Is this a requirement of the law?
Yeah, it's good to have it.
We can very visual. No, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, of course we got it digitally, just not. Yeah, yeah. It's more of a practical, bit of a pain to do that. Okay. Yes, yes, I think we've done it before.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Again, thank you for the visitors with us this afternoon. Mr. Rickard, are you okay with me managing the process?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So we are currently already in open session. The date is June 21st, 2022, and the time is 6:19 p.m. Will the board members please introduce themselves? We'll start with John.
John McPherson.
Dawn Davidson. Leon Melville.
Colin Clark.
Richard Freitag.
Yasmin Montiel, CEO.
Tony Washington, President.
Michael Stack.
The board will hear and consider the appeal of parent Carita Veal regarding her scholar JG. Section 551.0821 of the Texas Government Code authorizes the Uplift Board to hear this appeal in closed session unless the family of the scholar requests for the appeal to be heard in open session. At this time, I would ask the family whether they elect for this appeal hearing to be heard in open or closed session. As you can see, the family is not present here with us, so the board knows ample notice was provided to his parents, verbally hand-delivered via text message as well. We have been checking for the last 45 minutes or hour to see if the parents was here in the building. We had personnel posted downstairs and outside the door, and the parent has elected not to join us this afternoon, so we're going to go ahead and move on. That is good with you, Mr. Freebar.
Yep.
Thank you. The board will go ahead and hear this in closed session. Mr. Freebar, that's good with you? Great, thank you. If we can go ahead and turn off the video recorder, please.
Back into open session, and again, hopefully the parent will be here shortly. That way we'll be ready to go.
That's your binder. That's for you. Are you okay? Oh, you good to go? Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Moore. So we're going to go ahead and start from the top. We are back in open session. The time is 6:32 p.m. The date is June 21st, 2022. Will the board members please introduce themselves? We'll start from left to right.
Jonathan first.
Dawn Davidson.
Leona Melville.
Colin Clark.
Richard Frankfurt.
Yasmin Bonte.
Michael Stack. I note a quorum of the board is present. The board will hear and consider the appeal of parent Ms. Carita Veal regarding her scholar JG. Section 551.821 of the Texas Government Code authorizes the Uplift Board to hear this appeal in closed session unless the family of the scholar requests for the appeal to be heard in open session. At this time, Ms. Veal, I ask you whether you would elect for this appeal hearing to be heard in open or closed session. Open session means the video recording will stay, we'll post it to the website, there'll be no certified agenda kept of the meeting. Closed session means we'll excuse all members of the public who don't have any from the room. There'll be no video recording posted. Video.
I'm sorry, the meeting, is that, since it's open, was it listed on the website or listed?
It was,
Okay.
yeah, it was posted in compliance with the Texas Open Meetings
Where
Act.
was it listed at?
It was posted online on the website and outside
Okay.
by the elevators. Yeah. Would you like to hear me heard in open session or closed session?
Open is fine.
Open, so again, so open means we'll
I've
record.
actually invited people by phone to
Okay.
attend as well.
Okay,
Open is fine.
okay. So you're okay with it being recorded and posted to the website?
Yes.
Okay, right, so we will hear, we'll have the hearing in open session. So please note the procedures for this appeal hearing are as follows. Ms. Veal, you will have 10 minutes to present your appeal to the board. You may reserve part of your 10 minutes if you so choose for rebuttal to the administration's presentation. That means if you have a total of 10 minutes and you want to speak for, like, let's say, for example, 7 minutes and say 3 minutes for rebuttal, you would say 3 minutes to speak after the administration presents their arguments. So of the 10 minutes, would you like to reserve any time for rebuttal, and if so, how much?
No, actually, I will forward let the board do their rebuttal, and I can say mine for the end.
Okay, well, the board is only here to hear the appeal. So the administration is going to have 10 minutes and can save some of their 10 minutes for rebuttal. Anything you may say, you have 10 minutes and you may reserve any of
So
your
the
time.
administration will speak, not the board.
The board is not speaking, that's correct.
All right,
So-
so the administration is welcome to go, and I will hold mine toward the end.
Well, sorry, let me try to clarify. You will have 10 minutes total, and administration will have 10 minutes total. So you will have 10 minutes to speak, you will go first, and of that 10 minutes, you can save any amount of that time, 1 minute, 2 minutes, however much time you would like, to speak in response to anything administration has to say.
Just subject, they are welcome to go just for me to gather myself. I just did walk in, and that can help me in these 10 minutes that they're going, so I can gather my things. I mean, do you have something in writing that I can't do that?
No, of course, but,
Okay. I mean, I was
Yeah, that's
sitting
fine.
outside for a minute waiting
Yeah.
to get in, and I couldn't get in.
Sure, no, that's fine. So administration, we'll have administration, we'll ask administration to go first. They'll have 10 minutes administration. Do you have a rebuttal time?
Can we do 7 minutes and then 3 for rebuttal?
7 minutes and 3 for rebuttal. Ms. Veal, would you like the same after administration speaks? You'll have 7 minutes and then 3 minutes for rebuttal?
If necessary, yes. Will there be any accommodations, would there be any accommodations to do so? I may need to take breaks, make sure I compare them, vice versa.
I mean, they'll have their 7 minutes to speak, and they're going to say 3 for rebuttal.
Okay.
So would you like the same?
At this time, yes.
Okay. So we'll say, so we'll put down 7 minutes for Ms. Veal, and she saved 3 minutes for rebuttal. So a couple of important notes for everyone. This is an administrative proceeding. This is not a court of law. The procedures here are set by Uplift Education. There are no rules of evidence. There are no rules of hearsay or the like. The parties are not permitted to ask questions of the board or of each other. The board may, but the board is not required to ask questions of the administration or the scholar or the scholar's family. So the board may, but is not required to ask questions of administration or of yourself. For scholar confidentiality purposes, especially since we are staying in open session, the scholar, JG, will refer to him as JG, and any other scholar will refer with his or her initials. Lastly, the board will not make any decision in closed session should they elect to go into executive session to speak with their attorney. So administration, are you ready to proceed?
We're ready. So I ultimately just kind of want to frame the issue for the board. Right now we're looking at, Uplift has made the determination that it's not in JG's best interest to continue or to re-enroll in Uplift Grand Primary. So that's kind of what we're talking about here. And before I kind of really dig into the details on that, I wanted to provide the board a background on what the law is and what we're looking at. So homeless scholars are allowed to enroll under the McKinney-Vento Act. The McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that was established in 1987 and provides protections for homeless individuals. And in particular, the provision that we're talking about here provides protection for homeless children specifically, and it's designed to address the challenges that homeless children face in enrolling, attending, and succeeding in schools. So one of the challenges that homeless children face is transportation. So that's to ensure that they have equal access to the same free, appropriate public education as their housed peers. The McKinney-Vento Act requires schools to arrange transportation, even if they don't provide that transportation to other students. Another challenge for homeless students is school stability. So as homeless children are frequently highly mobile and move in and out of school attendance zones throughout the school year, the Act calls for schools to keep students in their school of origin unless that's not in their best interest to do so. The Department of Education has spoken on that and provided some guidance to schools in making this best interest determination. The DOE has stated that schools should consider the impact of mobility on achievement, education, health, and safety of the child, and encourage schools to also consider the school placement of siblings in determining what is in the best interest of the scholar. If after consideration of these factors, the school disagrees with the presumption that keeping the student in the school of origin is in the student's best interest, the school provides a written explanation of that decision to the parent, and when the parent disagrees with the school's determination, they appeal through the local grievance process. And that's where we are today. So Uplift has determined that the re-enrollment of Scholar JG is not in his best interest. Ms. Veal has appealed that determination. JG enrolled at the beginning of the 21-22 school year as a homeless scholar under the McKinney-Vento Act. And on March 25th, he was withdrawn after Uplift received notice that he had enrolled in a district out of state. Between his enrollment in mid-August and his withdrawal, he accumulated more than 40 absences. And then on May 2nd, JG returned and requested to re-enroll at Uplift. So that's the time period that we're looking at now is the re-enrollment. With knowledge of how little JG had attended school in his prior enrollment and an understanding of the obligations that Uplift has under the McKinney-Vento Act, Uplift consulted with the Region 10 Education Service Center, and Region 10 assured Uplift that the best interest process and the factors that it was considering were appropriate and in line with other Texas public schools as well as the McKinney-Vento Act. So accordingly, the same day, Chief Legal Officer Alex Burke provided a letter to Ms. Veal explaining that Uplift did not believe that JG's continued enrollment in Uplift was in his best interest, They specifically cited his frequent absences during his first enrollment and the enrollment of his siblings at another elementary school outside of the Uplift network. Ms. Beal appealed Uplift's determination, and JG was re-enrolled on May 5th, pending the outcome of this appeal process. And he has been enrolled while this process has been ongoing. So I'd like to take you through a brief overview of his first enrollment and the services that were provided to him to provide a background to Uplift's ultimate determination. If you'd like, you can follow along with this timeline on page 84. It's tab number 6 of your notebook. So upon JG's first enrollment, Uplift began the process of providing resources to him in accordance with the McKinney-Vento Act. Specifically, Ms. Beal requested a fuel gift card from Uplift to assist with transportation difficulties. Previously, Uplift had only ever provided DART passes to its McKinney-Vento scholars, so it took a few weeks for them to go through the process to get this gift card secured. During this time, JG had relatively good attendance with only 5 absences before Uplift made its first attempt to provide the fuel gift card to Ms. Beal. Uplift first offered a $250 fuel card to Ms. Beal on October 6th, but requested that she sign an agreement that the card would only be used to ensure JG's attendance at school. After Ms. Beal expressed concern with some of the statements in the fuel card agreements, particularly those regarding liability and providing updates on housing status, Uplift removed those statements the same day and provided the new agreement to Ms. Beal, but she still did not sign. Accordingly, Uplift began the process of contracting with a company that would provide direct transportation for JG. Ultimately, they contracted with a company called Zoom, but the process did take a bit, and as it was proceeding, Uplift counselor Catherine Savoy reminded Ms. Beal that the $250 gas card was still available for her and for her scholar.
A minute, 30 minutes.
Okay. So on November 2nd, Ms. Beal signed the new fuel card agreement, and during this time, the scholar had 4 more absences for a total of 9 since enrolled. Despite providing the fuel card, he continued to miss school. While all of this was ongoing, Uplift continued to work towards a contract with the outside vendor, and after providing a second fuel card, after providing a second $250 fuel card on January 13th, Uplift's agreement with the Zoom rideshare program began. Uplift had this program in place. Nonetheless, JG continued to be absent with 15 more absences despite having access to both Zoom and fuel cards. On March 22nd, Uplift was contacted by Zoom that Ms. Beal had canceled their services. The absences and this pattern continued following his re-enrollment on May 5th with 4 more absences before his last day of school. And he was also late or left early almost every day following his re-enrollment. His grades have also struggled since his re-enrollment. Based on the foregoing, it's Uplift's position that re-enrollment at Uplift Grand Primary is not in his best interest because of his attendance and the enrollment of his siblings at another campus that would streamline their schedules and transportation if they were enrolled in the same district.
Great, thank you. And that is 7 minutes exactly. Ms. Beal, we will turn to you.
Okay. Parts of that here, I really apologize, I didn't hear just a few pieces of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we would love to be able to control the environment of the building, but.
That is okay.
unfortunately,
Also,
so.
because she stated his name, is this going to be edited, closed, or are we going to restart? Our privacy of the scholar, or he named him on the video.
Yeah, we can take a look at editing the video.
Because at this time, I was privacy.
Yeah, sure, we understand. So you'll have the 7 minutes that you requested to present your arguments. And we're going to start that now, okay?
Okay. McKinney-Vento is a federal program. And it's mandated and it has to be in compliance. If it was easy just to let go, I would. But I did choose Uplift because it was a better choice. I had a son that went through the program and I still love what he learned in first grade. Of course, that was many years ago. But under McKinney-Vento, of course, disasters have happened, and that left us displaced. With that, it also made the school a choice of priority and immediate. This time around, immediate enrollment was not happening. Even on the, I don't have an exhibit, I'm sorry, but it is in the book, 427, I came to the school several times to enroll. I was turned away, I was turned down. TEA says immediate enrollment of these children, no matter what. No matter the residency, no matter the documents, you must immediately enroll. That's regulations under the state. McKinney-Vento says the same thing. Every student succeeds says the same thing. No child left behind. Homeless individuals, families who lack a regular residency has protections and rights to education. Now, is that good for us? Yes. Is it bad that we are displaced? Yes. But it also says that through this commitment through McKinney-Vento, that I have a liaison to help me through these transitions. That didn't happen. It also said I would have counselor services. Those were streamlined or denied on the second time in return. Now, we wouldn't have stayed, yes. It was a very difficult place. You guys offer social, emotional quite a bit. Well, mental health is real for our family. We were in the cold for 4 days with no air, no heat, and our whole home was destroyed. We sat in that. We sat in the tornado where our whole area was declared a disaster, not just by the state, but by the president. And as we moved towards back to Grand Prairie, because this is where we were going to make our home, it works out. Yes, I do have other children in other schools, but they're getting special education services that, and I'll just be honest, sometimes we know what we're good at. And Grand Prairie offers my children that special education services because that's where my son is autistic initially started. I actually brought him over to Uplift, but it didn't work out, so I returned him back so he can get the proper services that he needed. But that was an opportunity for my son to also have that. Again, the rights and protections is a federal compliance. When I was denied for 427 till the enrollment paper says 5-5, but my dispute letter says 5-2. That shows you still denied the enrollment from 5-2 to 5-5, and I actually was enrolled. There's duties that are required from the liaison. The liaison was not available to me whatsoever. The liaison she's my point of contact. She's my privacy, my confidentiality. She connects me to all the services. And when I say all, that's transportation, that's tutoring, that's if it's gifted and talented, whatever you have at Uplift, I should have been privileged to. Because he said if he could do the services, and they weren't. This time around, I was denied the laptop. This time around, I was denied just certain little specifics. I was denied access to the counselor. When I asked to speak to the counselor, the dean of the campus said I couldn't. She was not available. I actually came up to the central management office under Mr. Alex Burks because we had established, I thought, what was a relationship based on the email that I was going to have a successful school year and that he was aware of my situation and that we were going to do all that was required to make sure that, this happened. Yes, I had to leave in the middle of the school year. My son caught a virus for 2 weeks, documented medical. I also have a child that had another medical issue, and we had close COVID contact. There's all these different things that took place with health, but I always spoke to either Miss Savoy or Miss Alonzo in regards to different things. I even came up to the school before we left for the period of time because we lost our home again because they were doing, the hotel was doing a lot of different transitions and became unsafe. I had reached out to my liaison, but this is my second liaison with the district. The first one was no longer available, and then this one was non-void. It was either a text message. She never came to meet me. She never came to see the services I need. She never came to intake, as TEA was saying, make sure you do an intake, do the resident, but they knew where I stayed because they visited the hotel. Yes, I can't take $250 gas cards with no car. Where's the ethics in that? So no, I didn't. I can't take a car that I don't have. And then when I begin to have rides, then I ask for this more and then more, but then again, my rides were not sufficient, so I leaned on my district again. Because that would have been perfect to have that transportation. And then once it did get in place, Zoom wasn't safe. And I shared that with my liaison. The driver was passing up my home several times.
Yeah, the minute 30 left.
Passing up. So to close it, on attendance, you guys deny me based off of attendance. Well, attendance, truancy prevention measures. TEA says that you cannot initiate any attendance if you do not put any prevention measures in place for the family. Creating a behavior improvement plan or a transportation plan, or see what access was denied that I'm not getting. It also says that you can also provide me to truancy court, which no one ever did. It wasn't until I re-enrolled that we looked for something, because I came to central management office. Mr. Burke said, hey, I told him to enroll you last week under Shawnee Code. And I went back up there, and the dean at that time, Martinez, denied me again. So to your attendance is a barrier. And the main thing of McKinney-Vento, it says districts and leagues and cities must remove barriers for these families and these children. You cannot create barriers. You must review your policies, change your policies, but you cannot create barriers to transportation, access to services, school, education, social, emotional. You cannot create barriers. And the TEA held a hold harmless. So why am I being held
10 seconds.
for attendance when you're not even being accountable for it? They held you harmless for the year.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Veal, and that is 7 minutes on the dot. We will move back to administration for the 3 minutes of the vote time. Yes.
Before I address Ms. Veal's arguments, I just want to make sure that we keep our focus narrow here, that the determination that we're really reviewing is the best interest of JG here. And Uplift has determined that it's not in his best interest to go to a school where he's not going, he's not attending, and that's reflecting in his grades. Ms. Veal brought up his immediate enrollment. After speaking with the campus, we learned that the campus did not turn him away, but merely said, we don't do enrollment here, you're going to have to go and work with the enrollment department. We can't let a student that isn't enrolled here just go to a class. So they did not deny him, but rather just redirected them to the appropriate department. As for her concerns about the liaison is here, so she can answer any of your questions about her contacts with Ms. Veal and the services that have been provided and that sort of thing. Similarly with Ms. Savoie about the counseling services. I also wanted to touch a bit on why gas cards were provided. Ms. Veal makes a great point that gas cards simply wouldn't make sense if you don't have transportation. Uplift chose gas cards because Ms. Veal requested them. That was her request for them, and she represented that was the kind of transportation help that she needed, so Uplift provided that. When that wasn't working, Uplift changed course and decided to go with the Zoom rideshare program. They also addressed Ms. Veal's concerns about the safety, which is provided in one of the exhibits in here. There's an email back and forth about the safety of the rideshare program. And specifically when we're talking about the attendance and that attendance shouldn't be counted, Uplift is not seeking to punish JG for his attendance in any manner. They're not using his attendance against him, but rather to realize what is in his best interest, and it's in his best interest to attend school. And it's Uplift's position that it's in JG's best interest to attend school, and he isn't doing so, and he hasn't done so consistently since his second enrollment. So for those reasons, Uplift believes it's not in his best interest to re-enroll at this time.
And I'd just briefly say that the decision was not made in a vacuum. The Uplift did reach out to the Region 10 Service Center to make sure that the process and decision-making was in accordance with what other school districts do. And again, when we're looking at this, when we put everything else aside, what is in the student's best interest is to go to a school that he actually attends and makes it every day, almost every day in a regular manner. And with him having two siblings near the same age that attend a school in the area, part of that process and with the guidance. Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you.
Ms. Veal, your 3 minutes for rebuttal begins now.
All right. 3 minutes. Future of education. You removing me would say everything that you worked hard for will go out the door. Serve more underserved scholars. Well, I'm the perfect candidate for that, except I'm actually going through things. Only thing I required was what was law, federal law. I'm not asking you to say, hey, look at this local law and just look over it. No, I'm saying a federal law is protecting me and my family at this time, and I'm asking you to do the same. I know Uplift has taken out many of waivers to provide security for their network. I'm asking the same, provide security. Who knows what would happen? Yes, next week or the week after or when we finish kindergarten, but I wasn't offered the opportunity. It was taken, it was denied, it was removed. And I looked at Ms. Martinez and I asked her, are you denying me enrollment? And she said yes. She wouldn't let me call my liaison. Those things were removed from me. If anyone knows what week this is, when about Doe versus Fire, when the Hispanics tried to enroll their children and they were denied enrollment, this is a Constitution Supreme Court order. You cannot deny a child enrollment to public education. Bottom line. And yes, fuel cards I asked for. I'm highly mobile at risk. My life changes. And that may not work with some of Uplift, but at that time, someone could have streamlined us to make sure we were not streamlined and removed some things. Again, if you look at anything, I actually look at McKinney-Vento in its entirety, the federal acts of protections for my family. And that you will make the right decision. That keeping and Jeremiah, we know for a fact, and I sit in a lot of your board meetings, primary doesn't do that well. They're actually pretty much behind. And the attendance is based on the allotment that the state gives you for funding. But because of the last few years of COVID, it's been hard on everyone. Again, attendance has been waived for many. For the best interest is always of the child. It's never of the district. It's of the child. And if you don't know that by serving more scholars, every school would do great when you actually involve the parent, which is also under McKinney-Vento, every student succeed and no child left behind. I have rights to be here. I chose you, so choose us. Show us that we matter just as
30
much.
seconds.
30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Okay. Show us that we matter just as much. McKinney-Vento is a federal law. Yes, they can say that they didn't deny. I was denied. It's on video. I came up here, I went to school, denied. Access, he didn't have a Chromebook. He didn't have access to different things. Denied. It's okay. Denied. You're allowed to use teachers of residency, but I'm not allowed to come to school and have hardships. That's also what McKinney-Vento protects, economic hardships.
And that's the 3 minutes. Thank you, Ms. Beal. At this time, thank you for the presentations and the arguments. Do any board members have any questions for the family or administration? Okay, well, hearing none, the board, Mr. Freeport, board chair, does the board want to retire to close session to consult with its attorney under section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code? Okay, so the board will now retire to closed session again under section 551.071 of the Texas Education Code to consult with its attorney, and you may return to the lobby. Certainly outside, Ms. Field, you're welcome to any of the offices there. You do maybe help Ms. Field in the conference rooms. We will call you back in after the board returns from closed session with its attorney. No decision or action on your appeal will be made during closed session. The time is 7 o'clock, and the board is in closed session. If we could please turn on. Great. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I hereby call the open meeting reopened at 7:50 p.m. I note here the same quorum of the board is present. No decision was made by the board during the closed session. The board will now consider and take action on the appeal of parent Carita Veal regarding Scholar JG. Is there a motion of the board to uphold the level 2 decision regarding Scholar JG?
So moved.
Richard, thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Okay, Colin, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay, thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion is unanimously approved. Thank you, everyone. Ms. Veal, at this time, you've gotten notification of the board's decision, and if you can, I'd be happy to walk out with you. And then, Richard, I will leave it to you to adjourn.
I apologize, what was the decision?
I'm sorry, the decision was to uphold the level 2 decision and deny the grievance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you like, I'm happy to walk out with you and have a quick chat.
Okay, and then what about the closed meeting session, or my son's name, privacy was
Yeah.
not in compliance?
Yeah, I'll review it with our videographer, and we'll get taken care of. But if you'd like, I can walk out with you and have a real quick chat.
Okay.
Thanks. And Richard, I will hand the meeting back to you. Just okay. As the last official act.
Seeing that there's no further business before the board, the meeting is adjourned. The time is now 7:52 p.m. Thank you all for